The firelight flickered against the velvet drapes of Carrion Hall, casting shadows that seemed to breathe upon the walls. Imagine for a moment a home that stood as both fortress and coffin, where every mirror reflected not beauty but hunger. It was within these marble corridors in the year 1859 that the darkest betrayal of the century was conceived, not by an enemy at the gates, nor by thieves in the night, but by the very woman entrusted to nurture and protect. A widow whose heart had long since calcified into strategy and desire, and whose eyes fell not upon the prosperity of her daughter, but upon the youth of her daughter's betrothed. Her name was Evelyn de Fresne, and society adored her. Draped in mourning silks that clung like shadows, she was hailed as the epitome of grace, a mother steering her family's dwindling fortune with dignity. But the courtiers of Boston could not see the ledger that lived behind her gaze, nor the hunger that tightened around her every breath. Her eldest daughter, Clara, was 21, gentle, trusting, and newly engaged to Jonathan Whitmore, son of a shipping magnate, heir to riches that could restore the de Fresne dynasty. To Clara he was poetry come alive, a promise of security and devotion. But to Evelyn he was far more than a son-in-law. He was opportunity, he was youth, he was temptation given flesh. The first whispers of transgression were so delicate they escaped notice. A glance too long across a dinner table, a conversation held in tones that trembled with more than courtesy, a mother's hand brushing a sleeve with a hesitation that became intention, and Jonathan, unseasoned, restless, intoxicated by the presence of a woman who moved through society like a queen among pawns, found himself caught in a current he neither resisted nor understood. Do not mistake this for love. What grew between them was not affection but corrosion, a rot that ate silently at the foundation of family. Beneath the glitter of chandeliers, beneath the serenades of Clara's piano, Evelyn planted her first hooks, and Jonathan did not notice until they had already pierced the skin. And you, yes, you listening now, must see the truth for what it is. Families are not destroyed from the outside, they implode from within. If you sense the weight of this revelation pressing upon you, type, "The veil is broken," twice in the comments to seal this truth within you. And tell me, where in this vast world are you listening from? Because only together, across distances and shadows, can we drag secrets like these into the light. There is a cruelty more vicious than the lash, more enduring than iron. It is the cruelty of calculated seduction, when one cloaks betrayal in velvet, when sin masquerades as inevitability. Evelyn de Fresne had mastered this art. She understood timing the way a hunter understands the stillness before the strike. And Jonathan Whitmore, for all his wealth and breeding, was nothing more than prey dressed in fine tailoring. He was 24, with ambition in his step and naivety clouding his judgment. To him, Evelyn was not merely a widow but an enigma, a woman of intellect and sorrow who seemed to see through the vanity of society's rituals. She spoke not as Clara did, with gentle hope, but with fire that promised forbidden knowledge. When she asked him questions about his future, his desires, his fears, she was not a mother making polite conversation. She was unraveling him thread by thread until he was bare before her. Clara remained blind, her heart fixed on wedding gowns and guest lists. She believed her mother's watchful presence was protective, even loving. She never suspected that each stroll Evelyn took with Jonathan in the gardens, each hushed conversation in the library, was a step deeper into treachery. The first true fracture came on a rain-soaked evening in November. Clara had excused herself early to retire, her head heavy with dreams of the day she would walk down the aisle. Evelyn, however, remained in the drawing room with Jonathan. The fire crackled, the storm pounded, and Evelyn spoke of loneliness, of nights spent staring into emptiness since her husband's death. Her voice trembled not with grief, but with allure. And Jonathan, young and foolish, reached out, at first to comfort, then to embrace. What began as a kiss born of pity transformed into a union of appetite. That night marked the death of innocence in Carrion Hall. From then on, Jonathan was no longer Clara's betrothed. He was Evelyn's possession, bound not by love, but by guilt, desire, and the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. Understand this. Evelyn was not merely betraying her daughter. She was rewriting the very laws of family, tearing down sacred boundaries to elevate her will above morality. Such acts echo through generations, And if you feel the chill of this truth in your bones, whisper in the comments. Bloodlines fracture when lust rules the throne. Because what happened next would shatter not only Clara's world, but the entire de Frezin legacy. Carrion Hall did not sleep after that November night. The house itself seemed to pulse with new rhythms. Hurried footsteps in corridors at indecent hours, doors closing softly, voices hushed just beyond earshot. Clara noticed none of it, her mind consumed with ivory gowns and lace veils. But the servants noticed. Servants always notice. It began with whispers in the kitchens. The mistress lingers too long with the young master. Their shadows move where no shadows should. Yet fear kept tongues from wagging too loudly. Evelyn ruled her household not with affection, but with an iron hand concealed in satin gloves. No maid dared betray her, for she knew each of their secrets and debts, and she wielded them like daggers. Jonathan, meanwhile, became a man divided. By day, he escorted Clara through the promenades of Boston, presenting the image of a devoted fiancé. He held her hand with practiced warmth, smiled upon her with feigned devotion. But by night he returned to Evelyn's chamber, where duty was stripped away, where his weakness was laid bare. Each time he told himself it would be the last, and each time he succumbed again. For Evelyn had become his addiction, and addiction cares little for promises. Evelyn, for her part, felt not guilt but triumph. She had conquered the very structure that society revered most, the family bond. She revelled in her power, in the knowledge that Jonathan could never resist her, in the thrill of stealing from her own blood. But within that triumph was a seed of arrogance, and arrogance always bears poisonous fruit. The first crack appeared when Clara noticed Jonathan's restlessness. His letters grew shorter, his embraces cooler, his eyes often averted. She confided in Evelyn as daughters do to mothers, never suspecting that the very woman she sought counsel from was the architect of her suffering. Evelyn offered words of comfort, promises that Jonathan was merely preoccupied with business. She soothed Clara's anxieties with the same lips that kissed her betrothed in the dead of night. And so the trap tightened. Clara's trust deepened, Jonathan's guilt festered, and Evelyn's hunger grew. The household was a stage, each family member a performer in a play none dared to name. But every performance has its breaking point, every masquerade its unmasking. And the revelation, when it came, would be more devastating than fire, more final than death. Tell me this, before we continue, do you believe betrayal is born of desire or of power? Comment, desire or power, below, because in Evelyn's story the answer was both. The year turned, and with it came the winter balls, evenings where Boston's elite paraded their jewels and power, cloaking corruption beneath chandeliers and champagne. Clara shone like innocence itself, draped in satin, cheeks flushed with anticipation. She whispered to her friends of the spring wedding, of the roses she would carry, of the future she believed awaited her. And Evelyn, she too glided across marble floors, but with a secret fire in her eyes that none could decipher. For while society praised her elegance, only Jonathan knew the truth beneath the lace and pearls was a hunger that had already devoured him whole. Jonathan's torment grew unbearable. By day he was fiancé, dutiful and polished. By night he was sinner, kneeling before Evelyn's will. His conscience became a battlefield, torn between loyalty to Clara and submission to her mother. He began drinking more heavily, his hands trembling when he thought no one looked. He wrote letters he never sent, confessions of guilt, pleas for release, and burned them in the study before dawn. But secrets cannot be buried without stirring the soil. One evening, a maid entered Evelyn's chamber unannounced and froze at the sight before her. Jonathan, half-clothed, his hand on Evelyn's waist, their lips locked in betrayal. A gasp escaped the servant's throat before she could suppress it. For a moment, Evelyn's eyes met hers across the room, cold and commanding. The maid dropped her gaze and fled, knowing the price of disobedience. Within hours she was dismissed from service, her reputation smeared with rumors Evelyn herself spread. It was a warning to the rest of the household, silence or ruin. Clara, ever trusting, saw only fragments. Jonathan's absences, Evelyn's sudden bursts of laughter when his name arose, the way conversations between them would halt when she entered the room. She asked questions, timidly at first, then more urgently. Evelyn played her role flawlessly. "My child," she would whisper, You must not doubt the man who loves you. Doubt is poison, and poison ruins marriages before they begin. Clara believed her because she wanted to believe, and yet Clara's dreams began to shift. On more than one night, she awoke from nightmares. Jonathan's lips pressed to another's, a woman's figure hidden in shadow, her own reflection absent from the mirror. She dismissed them as fears of an anxious bride-to-be. She did not know her subconscious was already grasping what her waking mind refused to see. But fate does not tolerate blindness forever, and in Carrion Hall, fate had already sharpened its blade. If you feel the weight of that blade hanging over Clara's future, write in the comments. The blade always falls, because the moment of exposure was already on its way. Spring crept over Boston with blossoms and deceits alike. The invitations for Clara's wedding had been printed, the church reserved, the gown nearly fitted. Outwardly, all seemed as perfect as porcelain, yet porcelain, as you know, cracks not with force but with pressure building quietly until the shatter is sudden and absolute. Jonathan was unraveling. His guilt no longer confined itself to the night. It clung to him in the mornings, seeped into his words, poisoned his laughter. Clara noticed. When she reached for his hand, it was clammy. When she searched his eyes, they darted away. Still, she told herself love could weather doubts. She trusted her mother's reassurances, the very reassurances spoken by the lips that had damned him. But Jonathan's unraveling reached its climax one evening after too much brandy. Alone in the study, he poured his torment onto parchment. His words were jagged, desperate, a confession of betrayal, of weakness, of sin shared with the very woman who should have been untouchable. He signed it not with pride but with trembling hands, sealing his guilt in ink. For reasons known only to despairing men, he did not burn this letter. Instead, he tucked it beneath a ledger, intending perhaps to destroy it in the morning. But fate has a cruel appetite. The letter did not remain hidden. It was Clara who found it days later, searching the study for a misplaced ribbon of lace. At first, she thought it a business correspondence. But as her eyes traced the words, her breath caught. Your mother's lips, your mother's embrace, the fire I cannot resist. The blood drained from her face, her hands trembling so violently she could scarcely hold the page. It was not a dream, not a rumor. It was the truth carved into her fiancé's own words. She dropped the letter as though it burned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. Betrayal is one thing when whispered, another when imagined. But when laid bare in ink, undeniable and final, it becomes a blade driven straight into the soul. Clara stumbled from the study, gasping for air, the foundations of her world collapsing beneath her. Evelyn, hearing the sound of her daughter's sobs echoing through Carrion Hall, ascended the staircase with unhurried grace. She knew what had been discovered. She knew the shatter had come. Yet instead of fear, her lips curled in the faintest smile. For Evelyn believed herself invincible, a queen beyond judgment even by her own blood. If you feel the sting of Clara's heartbreak in your chest, write in the comments. Ink reveals what lips conceal, because now the betrayal was no longer a shadow. It was alive, undeniable, and it demanded its reckoning. Clara stood in her chamber that night with the letter clutched against her breast, as though pressing it closer might alter the words written upon it. The candlelight trembled, throwing long, distorted shadows across the walls. She stared into the mirror, yet she did not recognize the woman reflected there. Her cheeks were pale, her lips quivered, her eyes swollen from tears that seemed endless. She had always believed in love, in loyalty, in the sacred trust between mother and daughter. But now all she saw was a stage drenched in lies, where she had been the audience to a performance designed to humiliate her. Jonathan arrived the next morning, unaware of what she had uncovered. He greeted Clara with his usual false tenderness, offering flowers cut fresh from the garden. She did not take them. Instead, she thrust the letter into his chest, her voice a broken whisper. "What is this?" His face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words emerged. The silence was worse than any denial. Clara's hands trembled as rage flared through her grief. "You were mine, Jonathan, mine, and you gave yourself to her." He stammered, tried to explain, but what explanation could absolve such a sin? His voice faltered, his excuses crumbled. And then Evelyn entered. She did not creep in shame. She walked boldly into the chamber, her gown trailing behind her, her chin lifted as though she were entering a ballroom. Rather than the battlefield of her daughter's soul, Clara's tears turned to fury. "Mother, tell me this is not true." But Evelyn did not deny it. Her silence was her confession. A silence louder than thunder, sharper than any blade. Clara's body shook. She fell to her knees, not in weakness but in devastation. The woman who had given her life had stolen her future. The man who had sworn to love her had betrayed her in the most unthinkable way. And Evelyn dared to place her hand on Jonathan's shoulder, as if claiming him openly. "Clara," she whispered, her tone dripping with false calm, "love is not bound by rules. You are young. In time you will understand." But Clara did not understand. What she felt was not confusion, but the birth of something far darker: hatred. Hatred for Jonathan's weakness. Hatred for Evelyn's arrogance. Hatred that would fester until it demanded retribution. If you can feel the poison of that hatred seeping through your veins as hers did, write in the comments. From ashes, vengeance rises. Because Clara's grief was already transforming into something dangerous, and the de Frezin dynasty would bleed for it. Clara did not sleep that night. The candles in her room burned to stubs, their smoke curling like phantoms into the darkness. She sat by the window, staring out at the cold April moon, her face hollow yet burning with a new fire. Grief had exhausted her. Tears had drained her. What remained was something sharper, a clarity forged in agony. She could not undo the betrayal, but she could answer it. She began with silence. At breakfast the following morning, Clara appeared composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Evelyn, radiant in her victory, believed her daughter broken. Jonathan, pale and restless, avoided her gaze. They thought Clara's spirit had been crushed, but they did not understand the stillness of her eyes. It was not surrender, it was calculation. She played her role with precision. She spoke softly, she smiled faintly, she pretended to forgive. And in her pretense, Evelyn grew careless. For the arrogant always mistake silence for weakness, when in truth, silence is the veil beneath which storms gather. Clara confided in no one, not her younger siblings, not the servants, not even the priest who blessed her engagement. Instead, she began to watch. She noted every clandestine meeting between Evelyn and Jonathan, every glance exchanged, every door that closed too quickly. She memorized their patterns, their signals, their unspoken code of betrayal. Each observation was a weapon sharpened in her mind. And as she gathered this arsenal of truth, she began to weave her trap. She understood that to strike blindly would only damage herself. No, vengeance must be exacted with precision, in a way that would not merely wound but destroy. Jonathan's reputation was built upon honor, Evelyn's upon propriety. What would happen if the world saw them as they truly were? If Boston's glittering society looked behind their masks and saw the rot beneath? So Clara bided her time. She stitched her gown, she addressed her wedding invitations, she played the dutiful daughter and the patient bride-to-be. And all the while inside her chest, the furnace of vengeance burned hotter with each passing day. Do you see it now? The transformation. Clara was no longer the gentle lamb led to slaughter. She was the wolf dressed in silk, waiting to bare her teeth. And if you feel her shift, that exact moment when pain turns into power, then type in the comments, "Silk hides the wolf." Because the storm Clara was summoning would not spare anyone in Carrion Hall. It began with whispers. But this time they were Clara's whispers, carefully placed, deliberately sound. The very servants who once feared Evelyn's wrath now found themselves subtly guided by Clara's hand. She spoke not directly but with fragments, with suggestions, with sighs heavy enough to invite curiosity. "Mother has been occupied," she would murmur as she left the dining hall. Or, "Jonathan has been restless of late, has he not?" These half-phrases were enough. In a house already buzzing with suspicion, her words fanned the embers. Boston society thrived on scandal. A misplaced glance could ruin a name, a single rumor could unravel a fortune. Clara understood this, and she played the game with exquisite patience. At first, she allowed the whispers to circle within Carrion Hall. Then, at the church luncheon, she let them slip into the ears of women who thrived on gossip. The seed of disgrace was planted, and it spread with frightening speed. Jonathan felt the shift before Evelyn did. Business associates withdrew their warmth, Friends grew cautious in their conversation. He found himself the subject of stares, of lingering silences when he entered a room. The whispers followed him into taverns, into the marketplace, even into the pews of the church. He confronted Clara, desperate and trembling. "What have you done?" he demanded. Clara met his gaze with serenity. "I've done nothing," she replied, and it was true. She had only unshackled the truth that Evelyn and Jonathan themselves had forged. She did not invent the betrayal, she only unveiled it. Evelyn, arrogant still, dismissed the murmurs at first, but as the weeks passed, even she could not deny the frost creeping into invitations, the subtle rejections from Boston's inner circle. Her reign of dignity began to fracture. She lashed out at servants, accused them of spreading lies. But Clara remained untouchable, draped in innocence, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. To accuse her own daughter would be to admit guilt, and Evelyn was too proud for such humiliation. And yet Clara was not finished. No, whispers alone could not sate her vengeance. She needed proof. Proof undeniable, proof public. So she began her most dangerous move, orchestrating a night where Evelyn and Jonathan would be caught, not by rumor, not by suggestion, but in the flesh. If you see the brilliance of Clara's trap forming in the shadows, type in the comments. Whispers sharpen into daggers. Because the stage was nearly set for their ruin, and Clara herself was holding the curtain rope. The night Clara chose was deliberate, a grand dinner hosted at Carrion Hall, where Boston's finest would gather beneath chandeliers to drink, laugh, and watch one another carefully, as predators disguised as friends often do. Evelyn, determined to silence the whispers by sheer force of elegance, spared no expense. Silver goblets gleamed, violins filled the air, and the table was set like a coronation feast. Jonathan arrived late, pale and anxious. He drank heavily, attempting to mask his unease, but his hands betrayed him, trembling, restless. Clara greeted the guests with poise, her smile serene, her eyes clear. None could have guessed the tempest that roared beneath her calm. The servants had their orders, though they did not know the purpose. Clara had instructed them to guide Evelyn and Jonathan into the eastern parlor after dinner, under pretense of privacy. A single door was left ajar, a mirror angled just so, and behind it, half the dinner guests happened to wander as if by chance. It was Clara who orchestrated every step, weaving the threads of fate with a precision that mirrored Evelyn's own seduction months before. Evelyn, confident in her control, leaned too close to Jonathan in that parlor, her hand brushing his sleeve, her voice low, intimate. Perhaps she thought no one watched. Perhaps arrogance blinded her once more. But the gasps that rose from the shadows revealed the truth. The witnesses saw it. They saw the widow's hand upon her daughter's betroth, saw Jonathan's lips tremble with the weight of guilt. The parlor erupted. Whisper became raw, faces flushed with shock. Women clutched their pearls, men muttered curses. Jonathan stumbled back, his shame laid bare. Evelyn froze, her mask shattered in an instant, her beauty curdling into fury as she realized the trap had been sprung, and sprung by her own daughter. Clara stood at the doorway, her face calm, almost angelic. "No," she said softly, her voice carrying over the chaos. "You all see the truth." In that moment, Evelyn's empire collapsed. Her reputation, her influence, her carefully spun image of dignity dissolved before the eyes of society. Jonathan's honor disintegrated with hers, his name destined to rot in tavern songs and whispered scandal. And Clara, the girl once blind with trust, had become the executioner. If you can feel the silence after that public shattering, the silence heavier than screams, write in the comments. Masks always break, because once broken, they can never be restored. The guests departed Carrion Hall in a storm of whispers, their carriages clattering down the cobbled streets like thunder retreating into the night. But the destruction they carried with them was permanent. By dawn, Boston's parlors were ablaze with gossip, each retelling more venomous than the last. Evelyn de Fresen, the jewel of society, the widow draped in dignity, was now spoken of only as a thief of her own daughter's future. Jonathan Whitmore, heir to fortune, had become a cautionary tale of weakness, his family's honor dragged into the gutter. Within Carrion Hall, silence reigned. The silence of ruin, of a dynasty cut open. Clara remained calm, her face a mask of serenity, though her hands still trembled from the storm she herself had unleashed. She wandered the hall as though it no longer belonged to her, yet every shattered piece of it answered to her will. Jonathan fled first. By morning he was gone from the house, retreating to the Whitmore estate where his father's fury awaited him. The engagement was formally broken within a week, the Whitmores severing all ties with the Dufresne family. Their fortune was denied, their name cursed, and Clara, though heartbroken still, wore the satisfaction of justice delivered. But Evelyn did not bow. No, she rose from her disgrace like a serpent cornered, her pride bleeding but unbroken. She confronted Clara in the drawing-room days later, her voice no longer honeyed but sharp as a blade. "You think yourself clever?" Evelyn hissed, her eyes burning with rage. "Do you believe they will remember you as righteous? No, they will remember you as the daughter who destroyed her own mother. You've damned yourself with me." Clara did not flinch. She met Evelyn's fury with a calm so steady it chilled the room. "No, mother. You damned yourself. I only lifted the veil." Evelyn's hand trembled as though she might strike her, but she did not. Instead, she turned, her gown sweeping behind her like the tail of a dying comet. Yet in her retreat was not defeat, but resolve, for Evelyn Dufresne was not a woman to surrender quietly. The scandal had stripped her of society's favor, yes, but within her burned the same hunger that had led her to betray her daughter in the first place. And hunger, once denied, transforms into vengeance. If you feel Evelyn's venom still lingering in the air, type in the comments, "Vipers strike when cornered." Because the widow's story was not over. It was only darkening. The newspapers were merciless. Though no editor dared print the scandal outright, the columns dripped with thinly veiled allusions. A mother's disgrace, an heiress betrayed beneath her own roof, or union shattered by unholy appetites. Every Boston household knew the story, and every whisper carried Evelyn's name like poison on the wind. Yet Evelyn was not a woman who cowered. She did not lock herself away, nor weep in shame as others might. No, she dressed herself in her finest silks, adorned her hair with pearls, and appeared at the theatre only days after the scandal broke. The audience fell silent upon her arrival, but she held her chin high, her gaze steady, daring anyone to look away. Her presence was a challenge, a declaration that she would not be erased. Still, Evelyn understood the truth. Society could not be reclaimed with defiance alone. If she wished to survive, if she wished to strike back, she needed to play the game with greater ruthlessness than ever before. And so, she began her counterattack where it would wound Clara most deeply, in reputation, in whispers, in the very fabric of trust. It started small. Letters unsigned, left in the hands of acquaintances. Rumors that Clara herself had pursued Jonathan long before her mother, that she had enticed him, trapped him, and then feigned betrayal when the affair was revealed. Evelyn's lies dripped like ink into water, spreading slow but inevitable, reshaping the narrative until Clara's once spotless innocence began to blur. By spring, invitations to Clara diminished. Families who once courted her presence now turned cold, wary of attaching their sons to a name clouded in scandal. Suitors who had shown interest quietly withdrew, fearing entanglement with disgrace. Clara, who had fought so hard to unmask the truth, found herself painted not as victim but as villain. A bitter child spurned, a jealous daughter lashing at her own mother. And Jonathan? He remained silent, his cowardice sealing the damage. His refusal to defend Clara was interpreted as guilt, and in that silence Evelyn's lies flourished. Clara saw it unfolding, felt the ground beneath her shifting. Her victory had been brief, her justice poisoned. For every truth she had revealed, Evelyn had woven two darker lies. It was then Clara understood. This was no longer about a man, nor even about marriage. It was war, a generational war between mother and daughter, where love had curdled into hatred and only one could emerge unbroken. The drawing rooms of Boston no longer whispered of Evelyn's shame alone. They now whispered of Clara's bitterness, her envy, her supposed deception. And Evelyn smiled, for if she could not reclaim her own name, she would damn her daughters in its place. The stage was set. A mother and daughter locked in a silent duel, each strike delivered not with daggers, but with words, reputation, and ruin. If you see how Evelyn twisted the knife, type in the comments. Truth is fragile. Lies endure. Spring turned to summer, and the air of Boston thickened with more than heat. It carried Evelyn's poison, spreading through parlors, supper tables, and Sunday pews. Clara could feel it in the eyes that lingered too long upon her, in the half-curtsies offered with hesitation, in the sudden quiet that followed her steps. Evelyn had mastered the art of survival by destruction, and Clara was her chosen prey. But Clara was no meek child. She had inherited her mother's fire, though tempered by a different metal, one forged in integrity and sharpened by betrayal. Where Evelyn struck with whispers, Clara realized she must strike with evidence, with a truth so undeniable it could shatter the lies Evelyn wove like spider's silk. Her opportunity came in the form of Jonathan himself. Coward he might be, but cowardice has its weakness. Letters filled with apologies, pleas, confessions written in his own trembling hand. Clara had kept them, each folded carefully, hidden within a locked box beneath the loose floorboard of her chamber. In them Jonathan confessed his weakness, his surrender to Evelyn's manipulation, his shame in betraying Clara. They were damning, irrefutable, and they named Evelyn as the architect of seduction. For weeks, Clara wrestled with the decision. To use the letters was to destroy her mother utterly, not just her reputation, but her standing, her very survival. Yet to remain silent was to be strangled slowly by Evelyn's lies until nothing of her future remained. The breaking point came when an invitation, her last, was rescinded without explanation. The family, who once considered Clara as a bride, now whispered that she had orchestrated Jonathan's downfall to elevate herself. It was Evelyn's rumor made flesh. That night, Clara lit a single candle and opened the box of letters, her hands trembling not with hesitation, but with resolve. She would no longer play defense. She would strike. The following week, carefully, strategically, copies of Jonathan's letters found their way into the hands of Boston's most merciless gossips. Not all at once, but piece by piece. A paragraph here, a line there, each designed to drip truth into the sea of lies until the tide shifted back. The words were undeniable, Jonathan's signature unforgeable. His admissions left no doubt. Evelyn had enticed him, lured him, broken the sacred bond of mother and daughter. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Boston society, ever fickle, turned upon Evelyn with renewed vengeance. Whispers became accusations, and accusations became exile. No longer spoken of as a mere scandal, she became a monster, a mother who had consumed her daughter's future for her own hunger. Invitations ceased entirely. Former allies abandoned her. She was seen only at the edges of gatherings, if at all, her once commanding presence reduced to shadow. And Clara. For the first time in months, she felt the balance shift. She was not yet redeemed. Scandal never truly dies, but she had drawn blood in this silent war. Evelyn had tasted defeat, and the widow's pride could not forgive such a wound. The mother had struck first, the daughter had struck back. But wars of blood and name rarely end with even blows. They escalate until ruin swallows one whole. If you feel the weight of this duel tightening, type in the comments, family wars burn deepest. Evelyn de Fresne had been wounded, yes, but a wounded predator is not harmless. It is more dangerous, more desperate, and more willing to strike with savagery. The letters had undone her carefully woven tapestry of lies, reducing her once commanding presence to a hushed cautionary tale. Former allies turned their faces away, and the very halls that once echoed with her laughter now closed their doors. But Evelyn was not finished. She could not be finished. Pride, hunger, and fury burned too hot within her veins to allow surrender. If reputation had been taken from her, then she would destroy reputation entirely. If society cast her out, then she would tear society's darling, her own daughter, down into the dust beside her. Her vengeance began in shadows. Not with whispers this time, but with something far colder, alliances. Evelyn sought out those who despised the Whitmores, those who envied the de Fresne name, those who thrived on scandal like carrion birds. To them she offered to trade Clara's ruin in exchange for their favor, her weapon, marriage. If Clara's path to redemption was through a union with another noble family, Evelyn would poison every avenue. Suitors who showed interest found themselves visited by Evelyn's agents, armed with rumors darker than any before. They were told Clara had orchestrated Jonathan's downfall deliberately, that she reveled in cruelty, that madness ran in her blood. They whispered that her beauty was but a mask for a heart as venomous as her mother's, and society listened, because society always listens when destruction is offered. Clara, meanwhile, began to notice the shift. Suitors who once courted her with letters and gifts now vanished with no explanation. Invitations returned to her less and less. Whispers grew colder, sharper, cutting through her presence like knives. It was Evelyn's counterstroke, not in public, where letters might again unmask her, but in private, where shadows carried lies more effectively than ink. Clara confronted her mother one evening, meeting her in the once grand drawing room of Carrion Hall. Evelyn sat in the dim light, draped in black silk, her face pale but her eyes alive with venom. "You've taken everything from me," Clara said, her voice shaking but her stance unbroken. Evelyn's lips curled into a faint smile. "No, child, I've taken nothing. I've only reminded them who you truly are. You may have struck me with Jonathan's letters, but society will never embrace you. They will wonder always if the daughter is not worse than the mother. That seed of doubt is all I require." "Why?" Clara whispered, the question more plea than accusation. "Why must you make me your enemy?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice low, intimate and cruel. "Because you tried to take from me what was mine: respect, admiration, power. You are my daughter, Clara, but you forgot your place. And now you will pay for it." The words chilled Clara deeper than any public scandal ever could. This was no longer war for appearances. It was war for survival, mother against daughter, bound by blood yet driven to obliterate one another. If you can feel Evelyn's venom twisting, type in the comments. A mother's wrath knows no mercy. The night after her mother's venomous declaration, Clara lay awake in her chamber, staring at the cracked ceiling of Carrion Hall. The candle at her bedside had long guttered, but her mind burned brighter than ever. Evelyn's words replayed endlessly. "You forgot your place, and now you will pay for it." For weeks, Clara had fought with weapons of reputation, letters, whispers, truths revealed. But Evelyn was a creature born of that battlefield, forged in its duplicity. No matter how many blows Clara landed, her mother twisted and returned stronger, more ruthless. Clara now understood a truth she had long resisted: society's game could not be won against Evelyn. Not by her, not by anyone. If she wished to survive, she had to step beyond the gilded cage of drawing rooms and gossip columns. She had to fight her mother not with words, but with something Evelyn could not manipulate: consequence. It was Jonathan's name that returned to her thoughts. Jonathan, who had been both pawn and weapon in Evelyn's hand. He had betrayed her, yes, but he had also confessed, revealed in his letters the full measure of her mother's corruption. Clara realized that Jonathan was not merely a weakness in Evelyn's defense. He was the key. If Evelyn could be tied not just to scandal but to ruin in law, in finance, in the bloodless war of contracts and inheritances, she could be destroyed utterly. And so, Clara began her own secret campaign. Quietly, discreetly, she reached out to the Whitmores, not to Jonathan, but to his father, a man humiliated by his son's weakness and enraged by Evelyn's manipulation. Clara offered him what he needed: cooperation. Together, they could bind Evelyn's fate, not through whispers, but through something far stronger: exposure of debts Evelyn had hidden, contracts she had falsified, investments she had stolen to maintain her lavish lifestyle. It was a dangerous game. If word reached Evelyn, Clara would be annihilated before she could strike. Yet the thought of finally toppling the woman who had consumed her future filled Clara with a cold resolve she had never known before. Meanwhile, Evelyn moved like a shadow through the city, whispering poison into ears, tightening the noose around Clara's prospects. But she noticed something: her daughter no longer flinched. Clara's eyes carried a new steel, her presence a quiet defiance that Evelyn could not fully explain. It unnerved her. For the first time, Evelyn sensed she was being hunted in return. And she was, for Clara had decided, if society's rules could not save her, she would unmake those rules. And she would take her mother down with them, even if it meant setting fire to the very house they both called home. If you feel Clara stepping into her mother's shadow to strike back, type in the comments. To beat a serpent, you must become one. The Whitmore estate loomed like a fortress. Grand, severe, untouchable. Clara had not stepped across its marble threshold since the scandal, and as she entered now, she felt the weight of every whisper that had once clung to her name. Yet she walked with her head high, her gloves immaculate, her gaze unflinching. She was not here to beg. She was here to deal. Henry Whitmore, Jonathan's father, awaited her in his study. He was a man of iron temperament, his voice as sharp as the contracts that had built his fortune. For a moment he said nothing, only studied her with the cold detachment of a judge. "You carry your mother's look," he said at last, "but not her poison. Why are you here, Miss Dufresne?" Clara drew a folded packet from her reticule and placed it upon his desk. Within lay not only Jonathan's letters but copies of documents Evelyn had concealed, debts incurred under false names, investments siphoned from partners, accounts juggled with such recklessness that only constant deception had kept her afloat. Clara had uncovered them quietly, slipping into her mother's private drawers, risking discovery with every page she copied. "Because my mother cannot be fought with reputation," Clara answered. "You know this. She survives scandal. She feeds upon it. But this," she gestured to the papers, "this she cannot escape. She has stolen not only from me, not only from Jonathan, but from men of standing, from you." Henry's eyes narrowed as he sifted through the pages. "And why would you betray your own blood?" Clara's voice did not tremble. "Because she betrayed me first. Because if she is not stopped, she will ruin me, and many others besides. I would rather cut the serpent's head than be strangled by it." For a long silence, Henry regarded her. Then, slowly, he smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a man offered a weapon perfectly forged. "You are your mother's daughter," he said, "but sharper, colder, perhaps even stronger." He tapped the papers. "With this, we can bleed her dry. Her creditors will descend like wolves. Her name will not merely be tarnished, it will be obliterated. She will be a beggar in silk if she survives at all." Clara's breath tightened, but she nodded. This was the path she had chosen. From that day forward, Clara and Henry Whitmore became unlikely allies. Discreetly, they wove their trap petitions to creditors, whispers to business partners, quiet threats delivered to those who had once enabled Evelyn's schemes. Bit by bit, the foundation beneath her mother began to crack, and Evelyn felt it. She sensed the walls tightening, the shadows shifting against her. Yet she did not yet know the hand guiding the blade was her own daughter's. But she would. Oh, she would. If you can see the trap closing, type in the comments, "The serpent coils tighter." By autumn, Evelyn Dufresne felt the air shift around her. Creditors who once extended her endless favors now demanded repayment with uncharacteristic urgency. Partners who had smiled in her parlor now refused her calls. Servants whispered of unpaid wages, and merchants began to delay her deliveries. Something was moving against her, silent yet relentless, like a tide pulling her life out to sea. Evelyn was no fool. She traced the pattern. These were not random misfortunes, nor society's idle cruelty. Someone had orchestrated it. Someone close. Someone who knew her secrets. And in the hollow quiet of Carrion Hall she realized the truth. Clara, her daughter, her child, had turned the blade upon her. Evelyn's lips curved into a bitter smile as she paced the length of her drawing room. "So," she whispered to the shadows, "the lamb has found its fangs." But Evelyn did not rage. Rage was wasted energy. Instead, she plotted. For if Clara sought to ruin her through accounts and contracts, Evelyn would not answer in kind. No, she would strike at something Clara could never protect with paper or ink. She would strike at the heart. Jonathan, the boy, was still malleable, still torn between shame and longing, still bound to both women in a way neither fully understood. Evelyn had lost him once, yes, but she had not forgotten the weakness in his eyes, the way he crumbled when faced with her presence. Men of his kind, weak, desperate, pliable, could always be reclaimed. If she could bring Jonathan back under her spell, she could wield him not as a lover, but as a weapon to shatter Clara's alliance with the Whitmores, to make her appear jealous, hysterical, even dangerous. And if Clara's credibility could be broken, then the whole edifice of her carefully woven trap would collapse. Evelyn moved quickly. She sent word to Jonathan in secret, a letter penned in her own graceful hand, laced with regret and promise. She wrote of misunderstanding, of loneliness, of the cruelty of society that had set mother against daughter. She begged for forgiveness, not as a seductress, but as a woman cast adrift, reaching for the only soul who had once understood her. Jonathan, weak as ever, could not resist. Within days he returned to her side, trembling, torn, yet ensnared once more. Evelyn welcomed him not with passion, but with tears, her arms soft, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of the stage. And slowly, Jonathan bent again to her will. Clara sensed it. She saw the change in Jonathan's letters, the distance in Henry Whitmore's tone, the unease in her ally's eyes. Her mother was moving, striking not with whispers now, but with flesh, with loyalty, with love. The war had entered its most dangerous phase. If you feel the storm breaking open, type in the comments. Blood turns against blood. The night Clara discovered the truth, she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had gone to the Whitmore estate, as she often did now, to review the quiet progress of her alliance with Henry. But there, in a hushed corridor lined with portraits of grim ancestors, she overheard the servants whispering. Jonathan had been seen slipping into Carrion Hall by night, his carriage left hidden at the edge of the square. For a moment Clara could not breathe. The image of it, her mother's shadowed rooms, Jonathan's weak, pleading eyes, Evelyn's serpent smile, struck her like a blow. After everything, after ruin, after betrayal, he had returned to her, and Evelyn had welcomed him back. When Clara confronted him days later, Jonathan faltered as he always did. His words spilled out in stammered fragments. Evelyn was alone, Evelyn was broken, Evelyn needed him. He spoke of forgiveness, of pity, of the bond they all shared. But Clara saw through him. Pity was a mask, forgiveness was an excuse. What Jonathan craved was not Evelyn's salvation, but her control. And Evelyn, cunning as ever, had seized upon his weakness to strike once more. That night, Clara returned to Carrion Hall not as a daughter, but as an adversary. She found her mother in the drawing room, seated in the half-dark, a book resting unopened in her lap. Evelyn did not rise when Clara entered. She only looked up, her eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. So, Evelyn said, her voice smooth as silk, "You've learned what loyalty looks like." "Loyalty?" Clara spat. "You've chained him again like a dog. You use his weakness as your weapon. But I won't let you." Evelyn's smile deepened, cruel and unyielding. "You won't let me? Child, you've already lost. Jonathan is mine. His father may scheme with you, but blood is blood. And when the world sees that he has returned to me willingly, what will they say of you? That you are bitter, that you are jealous, that you are unfit for any man's devotion." Clara's hands shook, but not with fear, with rage. For the first time, she saw her mother not as a serpent coiling in shadow, but as something worse, as a mirror. The ruthlessness, the hunger, the fire that burned in Evelyn's eyes, it lived in Clara too. And for the first time, Clara felt the temptation of it. She leaned close, her voice low and steady. "If you want war, mother, then war you shall have. But know this, I will not fight you with whispers or with suitors. I will not fight you in parlors or newspapers. I will end you where you live, in this house, in this family, even if I must burn Carrion Hall to the ground." For the briefest flicker, Evelyn's mask faltered. Just a breath, just a heartbeat. But Clara saw it, and she knew her mother had heard the truth. Her daughter was no longer afraid. If you feel Clara crossing the line into her mother's darkness, type in the comments. Fire answers fire. Carrion Hall stood like a relic of another age, its stone walls blackened by soot, its windows glinting like cold eyes, its corridors echoing with the weight of secrets too old and too vile to name. For years it had been the stage of Evelyn's triumphs, her seductions, her scandals. But now Clara looked upon it not as a home, nor even as a prison, but as a weapon she would wield against the woman who had birthed her into torment. The thought had taken root the night she threatened her mother. "Even if I must burn Carrion Hall to the ground." At first it had been fury speaking, raw, unrestrained. But fury is a seed, and in Clara's mind it blossomed into resolve. Evelyn could survive whispers, she could twist suitors, bend Jonathan, manipulate society. But Carrion Hall, her fortress, her stage, her throne, if that was stripped from her, she would be nothing. Clara began her plotting with cold precision. She knew every corridor, every hidden stair, every flaw in the old house. She remembered where the wood had softened from damp, where the walls creaked under strain, where the old servants kept their lanterns and oils. She did not need to strike with fire immediately. No, she would weaken the foundations first. starve the house, rot it from within, until one spark would be enough to reduce Evelyn's empire to cinders. But she did not act alone. Quietly, she confided in Henry Whitmore. Not the full truth, not the flames she dreamed of, but enough for him to understand her resolve. If her power lies in that house, Kyra told him, her voice steel, then I will take the house from her. Henry, a man of practicality, did not question. He arranged the creditors, ensured the debts tightened, and whispered to buyers of Carrion Hall's decay. Bit by bit, the house began to bleed value, its grandeur turning to burden. Yet Evelyn sensed something shifting. She walked the corridors at night, feeling the unease in the walls, hearing the whispers of servants who no longer adored her, who feared instead. Even Jonathan, weak and wavering, began to avoid certain rooms, muttering that Carrion Hall felt different now. Evelyn dismissed him with a laugh, but in the solitude of her chamber, she too felt it. The air heavier, the silence charged, as though the house itself were turning against her. Clara moved among the shadows of Carrion Hall like a ghost. She was no longer the obedient daughter, nor the desperate heiress. She was something harder, darker, almost spectral. She had embraced her mother's ruthlessness, but shaped it into something sharper, less bound by society's rules. And with every step she took through the fading corridors, she whispered to herself, if she will not release me, I will bury her here. The war had moved beyond scandal, beyond suitors, beyond society's judgment. It had become elemental. Fire against fire, blood against blood, house against house. And soon, only one woman would walk free from Carrion Hall. If you feel the house itself becoming a battlefield, type in the comments. The walls remember. The curse of 1831 had not ended with blood spilled in secret gardens, nor with whispered pacts sealed in candlelit chambers. No, it had metastasized, growing across centuries, a shadowed inheritance carried in silence. By the late 19th century, as America reshaped itself through war and industry, the family names tied to the pact still lingered like specters on courthouse records, wills and land deeds. Yet the blood memory of that night was heavier than wealth, heavier than titles, heavier even than time itself. Descendants of both the Countess and the enslaved mother bore its mark, though in different ways. In the high halls of the Southern aristocracy, heirs were plagued with paranoia, betrayal and sudden deaths that left estates shattered. In the quiet cabins of freedmen, whispers persisted of children born with dreams not their own, of voices carried across generations that recalled things no living soul should know. Some spoke of strange coincidences, of a child who bore the exact scar of an ancestor long buried, of another who spoke fluently in the dialect of the old French countess without ever being taught. It was as though the pact had woven itself into flesh, blood, and bone, binding two lineages together, ensuring neither could ever escape the other. They were cursed to reflect, like twin mirrors facing each other endlessly, each generation forced to carry echoes of the same sin. In the 20th century, when scholars and amateur historians dug through parish archives and yellowed court ledgers, they stumbled on inconsistencies. Baptismal records missing, wills altered, the same child appearing under two names in two households, as if history itself could not decide to whom they belonged. Those who probed too deeply often stopped their research abruptly, sometimes claiming illness, sometimes refusing to speak of it again. Others published fragments of the truth, only to die under mysterious circumstances before finishing their work. The story of the deadly pact remained unspoken in public, but in whispered lore it grew more terrifying with every retelling. For what was once dismissed as a Gothic tale of scandal became something darker, a story of stolen fates. The exchanged children had not merely been swapped, they had been bound. Every descendant carried the weight of choices they had never made, destinies twisted by a bargain neither forgiven nor forgotten. And the land itself seemed to remember. Old plantations where the pact was struck remained unsettled. Families moved in, only to abandon them after nights of screams with no source, shadows that lingered too long in candlelight, and children who woke speaking the names of those dead for over a century. Locals avoided them, calling them lands of the pact, where no seed would sprout straight and no family would live in peace. What began in 1831 had never ended. The Countess and the enslaved mother had ensured, perhaps unknowingly, that their decision would never stay buried. They had traded 2 babies, but the real exchange had been far greater. 2 lineages, condemned to carry each other's ghosts, each other's debts, each other's shame. The deadly pact was not simply history. It was a chain still rattling through the present. In the end, the truth of the deadly pact could not be buried beneath soil, nor sealed away in family vaults, nor erased from parish ledgers. It lived, not in words, but in blood, and blood does not lie. The exchanged children had grown, lived, and died, yet the consequences of that single night in 1831 were eternal. For generations, the 2 lineages, one born of privilege, the other born of bondage, mirrored each other in uncanny ways. A wealthy heir who squandered his fortune at the same moment a freed descendant found sudden prosperity. A son born with pale skin in a family that had long been dark, while across the river, a child of startling complexion appeared in a lineage that had once been untouched. The pact was not just a secret, it was a mechanism, a balance that history itself seemed compelled to enforce. By the dawn of the 21st century, whispers turned into genealogical investigations. DNA testing, once meant to trace ancestry, uncovered fractures in family trees. Cousins who were not cousins, siblings who were not siblings, bloodlines that did not match the names on gravestones. Lawyers were hired, lawsuits were filed. Estates long thought untouchable were thrown into chaos, and yet the deeper they dug, the less anyone could separate truth from curse, because the pact had not only twisted families, it had twisted time itself. Descendants spoke of dreams that were not theirs, nightmares of being held under candlelight, hearing whispered oaths in French and Creole, feeling the hot wax seal a fate they had never chosen. Some woke with tears streaming down their faces, whispering words in tongues they had never learned. Others saw apparitions, women in nightcloaks standing at the foot of their beds, 2 mothers forever watching, forever weeping. Historians now argue over whether the pact was real or myth, but to those who carry the blood there is no question. For they know the truth that when lives are exchanged, destinies do not simply shift, they intertwine. The American dynasty was destroyed not by war, nor by politics, nor by fortune squandered, but by 2 women bound by desperation, rage, and sorrow, who in a single night remade the future. One sought to preserve her status, the other sought to preserve her child, and together they cursed generations yet unborn. And perhaps that is the true lesson, that secrets, no matter how carefully buried, are not silenced. They bleed into the soil, into the walls, into the bones of children not yet conceived. The Pact of 1831 was not merely a scandal, it was a warning that every lie comes at a price, every deception births a debt, and every bargain with fate carries an interest that time will always collect. Even now, in certain corners of Louisiana, whispers remain. Of houses where babies cry, though none live there. Of family portraits where unfamiliar faces appear. Of graves where flowers wither overnight, as if the earth itself rejects remembrance. The dynasty is gone, the plantations crumble, the ledgers rot, but the pact remains, and as long as descendants walk the earth, as long as blood remembers, the curse will never die.